The Latte Factor isn't about what you can't have. The Latte Factor isn't about what your limits are. The Latte Factor is about yes. It's a book about yes. It's a book about what do you want?
And welcome to the Freedom Club podcast. I am your host, Curt Mercadante. Thank you so much for making the choice to spend some time with me and thousands of other listeners across the globe here as we talk about living a life of freedom and fulfillment. And that's just what I discuss with today's guest. He is co-author of a book that is currently number 5 on the New York Times Bestseller List for business books. It's called The Latte Factor. My guest today is John David Mann. He co-authored that book. Last month, I interviewed Bob Burg, who was the co-author of the best-selling Go Giver series of books. Well, guess what? John David Mann was Bob Burg's co-author on those books. He co-authored The Latte Factor with David Bach. Over the years, John's books have been published in 35 languages and sold more than 3 million copies. So it's really an honor and a pleasure to have John on today. He is also an entrepreneur. I was very interested to learn. He also had a successful career as a concert cellist and a prize-winning composer. We didn't even actually talk about that. I noticed that in his bio after we spoke earlier today. It was a real pleasure to interview John and talk to him about the Latte Factor, because when I first picked up the book, as I talk about it in the interview, I thought it was just simply a book about money. Well, guess what? It's about money, but it's not about money. It's really a book about freedom and forging the life of freedom that you desire and deserve. It's about making choices, yes, financial choices that can enable you to live the life you desire now, instead of having to wait till you're 65 or 70 years old. So without further ado, here is my interview with best-selling author John David Mann.
Welcome to the Freedom Club podcast, where we strive to pull you out of your life of quiet desperation, out of your comfort zone of misery, and propel you into a life of freedom and fulfillment. And now, here's your host for this journey, international speaker and coach, and serial entrepreneur, Curt Mercadante.
John David Mann, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
It's nice to meet you. It's my pleasure to be here.
And John, your books have sold more than 3 million copies. As we were discussing offline, I've read a number of your books without even knowing. Sometimes I was reading your books and
that'll happen.
I saw The Latte Factor, which is number 5 on the New York Times Bestseller List. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I kept seeing it everywhere. I picked it up, reached out, and here we are.
Yeah, no, I love it. That's great. I'm so pleased. Yeah, I know. A lot of books I've written, the people who read them and love them have no idea that I wrote them. I'm like the stealth author. I'm a ghoul, a ghost.
Well, you obviously keep busy at doing it. I know your website said you consider yourself the luckiest man alive. Why is that?
Well, I would say that's a recent thing. Okay. I've been blessed with many fortuitous events in my life, but I've also had tragedies and difficult times. I've been broke as much as I've been okay. But for most of my life, I think I experienced life day to day as a struggle, in the sense of I viewed my own kind of worth and worthiness in terms of what I was producing. That's what I was doing, achieving. And because I was never quite there, the book was never a bestseller. I was never quite here. The success was never quite rich enough or big enough or full enough or fulfilled enough. I was always kind of striving. So I was living from a place of striving. It's just been the last really few years, honestly, Curt, that I have come to a place of thoroughly and completely enjoying the day I'm in. And part of that, I think, is that I'm on my third marriage. Third one is just magnificent. Living with my best friend, having a wonderful life with her. And part of it, I suppose, is age, tempering some of the youthful impatience. But part of it is just, reading all the stuff that I write. I mean, when I write this stuff, Joan Didion, the novelist, once said, I write to find out what I think.
Interesting.
And we put those words in someone's mouth in one of the Go Giver books. And I think that's what I do. I write to find out what I think, and I'm often surprised at what comes out in the page. And a lot of it is good stuff that I didn't know that I knew, or maybe I didn't know. It just came from somewhere. But, when you're associating with Brendan Webb and Bob Berg and Dan Burris and all these magnificent people, some of it rubs off, and life rubs off. So I'm a happy person. What can I say?
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. When you talk about writing to find out what I think, journaling is one thing I highly recommend. And I didn't realize it until I was talking actually to a sales guru about, she had a sales workbook, and some people, actually she was on the podcast, and someone asked a question. I used to do these as Facebook Lives. Why do you have it? Why is it in a paper book? Why don't you have it online? And she talked about the science of actually having a pencil.
Yeah.
And writing it down, and the nerves in your fingers going to your head. And I used to journal. I used to type it.
Yes.
And now I write it. And
that's so interesting you say that. I have two stations where I write, and this has developed over years. I have two places that I write. And one of them is at my desk where I am right now, in front of my laptop, which I am right now. And one of them is in a different room, on a overstuffed armchair with a pad of paper and a pen. And what I use the chair for is when I'm starting a chapter or starting a book or starting something where there's nothing. I'm starting from a blank slate, and I'm trying to come up with an idea, come up with a thought, could even be a blog post, come up with a blog post. And I get my mind as blank as possible, where I'm generating ideas, generating something fresh. Once I've generated something fresh, and it might be, 99% garbage, but there's a 1% in there, like a sentence in that page that seems like it's got a spark in it. Then I'll take it to my laptop and sit down with my fingers and start tapping keys and manipulating. And so maybe I'll do 95% of the actual production on the laptop, but I don't generate something fresh on the laptop the way that I'll do sitting with a pad of paper with my awful, awful handwriting that nobody can read. Not even me sometimes. Yeah.
That's so interesting. I'm a big fan of the novelist, late novelist, Pat Conroy.
Oh yeah.
And I can't remember what book it was, but he talked about his writing style, and he just had these, it was like notebook paper, and would just write and write and write. And then I think he'd give it to someone to try and translate what he wrote. But it's amazing.
Writing is like living. It's messy. And, people, when you read the Mastering Fear or the Latte Factor or you read the finished product of something, it looks so put together because it is put together, but it doesn't start out that way. And our lives are like that. They're a mess. But there's a tremendous amount of joy and discovery in that. So, you kind of have to allow yourself to, that's one thing. I was going back to relationships. I've discovered with my wife how to be the mess that I am with another person present and not feel apologetic about it. And 99% of what I say may be nonsense, but then maybe there's 1% that has a spark in it. So,
well, I definitely want to talk about the Latte Factor. And for those of you listening to this podcast, John co-authored the Go Giver books with Bob Berg, who we had on last month. Mm. And there's a big similarity that I noticed between the Go Giver books and the Latte Factor, which is it doesn't just tell you something. It's a parable. It tells it in the parable form. Yeah. And to me, that is, you go back to the New Testament, right? You go and the power of storytelling versus me just telling you how to save money and how to live your life.
Yes. Yeah, there's when David Bach, first, he approached me about the Latte Factor idea right after the Go Giver came out, which is over 10 years ago.
Oh, wow.
11 years now, 11 and a half years. And he had written a number of number one New York Times bestsellers. He was a rock star in the publishing world. I was like the janitor cleaning up on the stage. I was unknown. And David was like Elvis. And he'd sold millions and millions of books. But he said, there are tens of millions of people who are never going to pick up any of my books. They're never going to pick up a nonfiction book called The Automatic Millionaire or, Smart Women Finish Rich. They're not going to pick up this how-to book because a lot of people just don't read. But they read a book like The Go-Giver. And I found that to be true. I've over the years, Bob and I have heard from thousands of people who said, I just don't really read, or I might read a book a year, but I picked up The Go-Giver and I read it in a weekend. And so David said, I want to do that. I want to write that with you, the Go-Giver version of my philosophy. So I said, great, awesome, off to the races. He went to his publisher, and his publisher said, nah, we don't want to do it. The publisher was not interested because he said, parables don't work. And the reason, and there is this belief set in the publishing world and among a lot of business people. I've met a lot of business people who say, I don't really like parables. They usually then say, but The Go-Giver is an exception, which I appreciate them saying that. Whether they mean it or not, I don't know. But there's a reason that parables have a bad rap among a lot of serious people, publishers, business leaders, and so forth and so on. It's because there's a lot of shallow parables out there, just unfortunately. There's some great ones too, but it's really easy in writing a book like The Latte Factor or The Go-Giver to slap a few character names on, come up with some characters, kind of like stick figures, and have them, tell each other the principles. And what it really is a lecture disguised as a story. Sure. And you know what? People don't want to read a lecture. What I love about parables, and I do love, it's like my favorite thing to write. I've written a lot of other kinds of books too, but I love writing parables. The thing I love about that is that people learn from a story, and they learn from a story when it makes them have feelings. Real learning happens through emotion. It doesn't happen through information. It doesn't happen through facts and figures and eyes and ears that just get stuff. And any good public speaker knows this. Real learning happens when people feel something. That's why sometimes you'll hear some bit of wisdom 20 times from different people, but it doesn't click until your best friend says it, or your spouse, or your mom, or your coach, or someone that you've never met before. But Brene Brown says it, or somebody that you admire says it, and you go, oh, it moves you in a way that you go, now I get it. That's the goal with a book like The Go-Giver. That's what you're trying to do. That's what you're trying to do, with a story. You're trying to tell a real story about real people with real feelings that people can read and become involved in. And it touches their lives. It rubs up against, it scratches their lives and has meaning.
That's beautiful. That's incredible. And you use the term freedom in the book. I think at its heart, it's not, when I first picked it up, I was like, okay, it's going to be like a Dave Ramsey book, and nothing wrong with Dave Ramsey, all that. It's going to tell, okay, invest your money, save your money.
Yes.
But I think at its heart, it's about freedom, because it's not just about save money and don't live. In fact, you want people to live rich. Now you have these 3 rules.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that. It's about money, but it's not about money, if that makes sense.
Exactly. That's, since you said it perfectly. I can add more words, but it just gets diluted. The first time I met David was actually before we wrote The Go-Giver, and I interviewed him for a magazine I was writing for, and I was, I expected the interview to be, frankly, a little dry, because it was going to be about money and saving and da-da-da-da-da. And I'd never been very excited about money principles. It's never been something that I'm very talented at. I'm like Zoe in the book. I'm not good with money. That's how I always have been, just like Zoe, which is why I relate to her. It's why I wrote her. And so I had this interview with David, and it was completely different than I thought it was going to be. What I got on the interview was his passion for helping people discover their true path, their true life. And at the end of the interview, he said, John, my belief is that every one of us was put here on this planet to do something unique, something nobody else can do but us. And the great tragedy of it is most of us aren't doing it because we're too busy scrambling, leasing and loaning our lives, making ends meet at the end of the month. He said, my mission is to help tens of millions of people discover or build financial freedom in their lives, how to own their lives so that they can do what they were put here to do. And, that's my definition of success, by the way, is to live every day with someone you love, doing what you were put here to do and doing it well. That to me is success. So that's really what the book is about. Yes, money and practical principles of personal finance are the vehicle that the story, travels in, and they're the vehicle to the point. But the point is about living your true life. It is about getting to the meat, to the gist, to the core of who you really are, and living that now, not like in 40 years when you retire. We've got this model that so many of us have learned, many generations have learned, which is you work hard all your life to make enough money to finance your retirement, at which point you put down your job that you probably didn't really enjoy at all, and now you start to do what you enjoy now that you're 65 or 70 or whatever, finally. And there are a few problems with that model. The first problem is you might die before you get to do those things. The second problem is a lot of people are finding that they can't retire. It just didn't work out, that they get to 62 and 65 and 68. The majority of baby boomers are not retiring, and their kids aren't going to retire either. The whole model is flawed, but the flaw runs deeper than that. It's a faulty premise. It's this premise of, let's put up with a life we don't love now in order to build a life that we hope to love sometime in the future. Yeah, I'm a big believer in delayed gratification, but that's not the expression of delayed gratification that I understand. David's whole thing, how to create the life you live now, this year, this month, not in 10 years, in 50 years. And that's what his whole financial thing is premised on, is how to live your exciting, rich, full life.
I love that you say that, because I have a saying that work-life balance is BS. And that a lot of people, I think of balance and I think of somebody walking on a tightrope, trying not to fall in and die.
That's good. That's
and it
great.
turns, a lot of people live, well, I'm going to put my head down. I'm going to ignore my relationships and my self-care for 2 weeks. But when this project's over, then I'll come home early.
Party.
It turns into a year, and then it turns into 65.
Yeah.
And even if you're, the alive is one thing, whether or not you're alive, but just in my family, people who lived that got to 65 and it was like God or karma or whatever said, no, knee replacement, stroke, heart attack, cancer, almost like the week after they retired.
Yeah.
And so I love that part of the book, because there are a lot of financial gurus out there who get people paralyzed with fear that you have to live that way, and you have to see yourself only as a paycheck provider. And like you talked about, even in your own personal experience, striving for something, striving to make that extra 5, 10, don't travel, don't do what you love.
Yeah.
And I almost want to go, there's 3 laws or 3 rules that you share in the book. I almost want to go in reverse, but they end up with, the third law is live rich now. And that doesn't mean waste money. It doesn't mean be irresponsible. No. But like you said, it means enjoying your life and living instead of waiting.
Yeah. What it really means for, I guess, in terms of the book, is figure out what's really important to you. Figure out what really matters to you, and then organize your present life, your current real existence life, in such a way that you're funding that, and that you're doing that. And maybe you're not doing that 100%. Maybe what you love to do is to travel the world. Well, maybe you're not traveling 12 months a year, but maybe, I won't give 100 examples. You can fill in the examples, but the idea is to figure out what's important to you, and then organize your financial life so that you fund that. And there are a couple of pragmatic financial principles that, as the character Henry says in the book, everybody has heard, so that it's easy to dismiss them, but hardly anybody is doing. And the reason hardly anybody is doing them is that either they're too intimidated by it, they don't understand it, or they don't have the practical mechanism for how to do it. This is true for me. My financial life has changed since writing this book, since being in the process of it. It has had a big impact on me, because, as I say, I've never been particularly gifted at organizing my financial life. So
that's interesting. Yeah, I was going to actually ask, you said you learn by writing, or you learn what you actually think. Yeah. And as you wrote this book, not just on the financial side, but have there been ways where you have begun to live rich now that you weren't before the book?
Yes, I think that's actually a process that it's like when you started out asking me why do I consider myself the happiest man in the world? It's a process discovery that's been going on for me. But, writing the book certainly fueled it. It's a funny thing that happens writing a book with someone like David, or true also with Bob Berg, or Brandon Webb. You mentioned before when we were offline, the book Mastering Fear I wrote with Brandon Webb, who's a Navy SEAL. Well, a lot of Mastering Fear is drawn from Brandon's experience in the military. The same way, this book, The Latte Factor, is an expression of David's financial principles. But in order to write the book, it's like I have to absorb that stuff, David's principles, Brandon's life, Bob Berg's thoughts, whatever there, absorb that stuff and mush it up with my own experience, my own life, what I think, what I've observed, and it has to come out fresh. So for example, David never said, these are my 3 principles. He has principles. He might give 5 in a talk, or 7, or 4, or 6. You read his books and there's a number of different lists. I had to digest David's stuff and make these. I knew that we had to have 3. I knew this book had to have 3 for it to work. The same way, but the Go-Giver books are 5. So in the same way, yeah, it's David's financial principles, but I also had to kind of internalize them and say, now, how would I say that? How would I express that? And in the course, it's like being a film actor. It's like being Meryl Streep and playing, Margaret Thatcher. You don't literally become that person, but you kind of do. And to do that, you have to kind of meld them with yourself. So in doing that, I sort of learned these principles in a way from the inside out. And that's been really, really a gratifying thing.
That's interesting. Well, let's talk about the 3 laws or the 3 rules. I can't remember if you call them laws or rules. But the first one is, and these get into what the latte factor is, right? And it's not necessarily about a latte, but as you said, it's about focusing on things that are really important versus what you're spending money on. So pay yourself first. That's the first rule.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that? Yeah.
So I'll expand on that. And also with that, there are a couple of myths of money that we go into in the book that Zoe learns. So the character Zoe, there's this 28-year-old woman named Zoe Daniels, who lives in Manhattan, who lives in Brooklyn, works in Manhattan, has a job where she's struggling. It pays sort of decently, but not enough for her to live on. So it's a struggle, taking her work home at nights and weekends and everything. And she meets this mentor, an elderly man named Henry. These myths she actually learns from her boss, a woman named Barbara. And the first myth is one that a lot of people have, including I always had, which is that your financial problems will be solved by earning more money. If you can increase your income, you'll become richer. If you can increase your income, you'll be more financially well off. And we didn't say it this way, but if you increase your income, you will increase your financial freedom. Makes perfect sense. Doesn't work. In reality, it doesn't happen. Here's what happens. So Henry asks Zoe, let me ask you this. Are you earning more now than you were when you started out at your job in Manhattan? She says, yeah, I'm earning quite a bit more. So are you more financially free? No, I'm not. What happens is when we earn more, simply put, we spend more. We bring our habits with us. We go into debt more. Our tastes grow. We move to a bigger place. Whatever it is that we do, however, with big purchases or small, typically when you earn more, you spend more, and you end up just as much behind or more so. Typically, more so. In fact, huge, we call it in the book, there's a chapter called Big Hat, No Cattle. And that's exactly what it's about. It's about people who have huge incomes, but are enormously leveraged. So they're less financially free than ever. So the first principle, the first of the 3 is pay yourself first. And pay yourself first goes like this. Typically when we get a paycheck, assume you're an employee, you get a paycheck every 2 weeks. Your paycheck comes, the first thing that happens is taxes, withholding come off the top. They go to the government. Unemployment, FICA, federal taxes, et cetera, Social Security. That comes off. Next, you take your net and you pay your mortgage or your rent, you pay your utilities, you pay your cable, you pay whatever. You got some groceries you got to buy, you got some fuel to put in your car, you got some clothes you got to update. And by the time you're done spending on the necessities, paying back your loans, paying back your credit cards, paying back your student debt, et cetera, then what's left over is for you, which for most people is zip. Maybe there's a little bit left over. And then honestly, what we typically do with what's left over is we go like, hey, I'm going to go out to dinner because I deserve it, right? So pay yourself first does not mean when you get your paycheck, first go out for that cool dinner that you reward yourself with, and then go the taxes, the withholding, the mortgage, the rent, the. No. Pay yourself first is totally different. Pay yourself first means figure out what's important to you in your life. Figure out what it is that matters, what you aren't doing right now that you want to be doing in your life. What are you not experiencing that you want to be experiencing? Is it a hobby? Is it a skill you want to develop? Is it a place you want to visit? Is it an experience you want to have with certain people? Is it travel you want to do? Whatever it is it a home you want to acquire at some point that's different than the one you have now? Is it owning your own home versus renting? What is it you want tangibly that you're not experiencing right now that you want to experience? Okay, great. Then when you get paid a paycheck, the first thing you do is you take money aside to fund that. Now, you may not be able to fund it so you can hold it in your hand this month. It may take a year. It may take 6 months. It may take 3 years, whatever it is, but you're funding that. Practically speaking, what David talks about, what you really want to do is have a pre-tax mechanism like a 401k, like an IRA, something that where, well, IRAs vary, but like a 401k where the money comes out before it's taxed so that you're then putting it into you're not putting it into retirement. And here's the big hitch. For a lot of people, the word retirement is an abstraction. Right. That simply means someday when I'm like my grandparents, I'll go to Utah and watch the sky. I don't know. So, for some, retirement is a very real thing, but for a lot of people, saving for retirement is kind of a low priority because it's not very exciting. It doesn't sound sexy. It doesn't excite. It's like doesn't mean anything to me.
Yeah.
No. What means something to you? What do you want? In the story, what Zoe really wants, she talks about it in the very first chapter, she really wants this photograph to hang on her wall. And I won't say a ton about it because it's a key thing in the story, but the photograph is a beautiful piece of art that she wants for the art's sake, but it means more too. The scene that's in the photograph is meaningful to her. How to take the picture of the photograph is something that there's a lot of layers of meaning to that. And we all have that. There's things that we want for a lot of layers of meaning. But pay yourself first is when you get paid, the first thing that happens is, and David says, pay yourself 1 hour of a work day. So one hour out of 8, which is like 12%, 12.5%. Say 10% of your income, roughly. You want to skim off the top and put into some vehicle, some account where you're saving it. Ideally, it's building interest to fund something that's important to you. And then after that, everybody else gets paid. Shall I go right to principle number 2? Because it goes hand in hand.
I was going to add something. It's interesting because I read this. Sometimes I'll read books and I'll be like, oh my gosh, I'm doing this all wrong. And there certainly are things in the book that I was like, I got to do this better. It's interesting. I had a PR and ad agency for 13 years. And it did very well. I actually shut it down overnight at peak revenue because I was unfulfilled, anxiety attacks. It was bad. But it was the exact thing you read about in terms of more money, more lifestyle. Lifestyle, not in a good way, but lifestyle wasteful.
Yeah.
And we wanted to travel at the time, my wife and I were married 17 years. We wanted to travel. We never traveled.
Yeah.
We are making less money than I made when I had my agency. I shut down a few years ago. And we've been now, in the last 9 months, we've been to Europe twice with our 4 children.
Oh, far out.
And it's funny when I tell people, oh, it must be nice. The company must be doing well. It's like, well, it's doing okay, but not as well as, you're affording European trips. It's like, aside from the fact that I put the American Express travel agent through hell, match Tuesday, come back on a Wednesday. Right now, let's, you find these things.
Yeah.
A couple things. One is I decided at the beginning of last year to find, I had a $600 a month Jeep Wrangler. Well, I traded that in. I got a Mini. I'm saving $200 a month. That's however much a year, $2,000, $2,400 a year. That's airfare.
Right.
And you start doing those things and adding those things. We started, we've had some lean months. My wife said, we maxed out our SEP for 13 years, and we've decided to do something a little different and doing it post-tax. It's an insurance product.
Sure.
It has to do more with the tax philosophy of taxes going up. It's a little bit of a gamble. But during the lean month, she said, should we cut back on that? And I said, no. Keep putting it in there until we're really in trouble, or and then cut it back. And as I was reading the book, I actually went out and I said, "See, read this.
Yeah.
You got to keep doing it because
it's important.
Yeah,
it's important.
Absolutely,
because it matters.
And there's crap that you find. I went through last year and I kept finding, especially for my old agency, subscriptions, things you sign up for, the Jelly of the Month Club, whatever it is. And it's like $20 here, $30 here. Well, as you talk, just a latte a day adds up for her to be able to get the picture and all that. So the pay yourself first, it really spoke to me and a lot of people. I'm sure
there's two things about your story that really stand out for me. One of them is, I love this. Your business was soaring, doing really well, at close to its peak, and you weren't traveling. And now you let go of that business and you've scaled that back. And now you're traveling, which proves the point. And, people cannot hear this too much. It's not financial. Why were you not traveling? It was not a financial limitation. Right. Why are you traveling now? It's not financial. It's a reorientation of daily choices. It's a reorientation of daily habits, because you're traveling now on less money.
Right.
It's like, and there was this wonderful book, came out in the 90s called The Millionaire Next Door. And we pay homage to it in the Latte Factor, a chapter called The Millionaire Down the Hall. Same principle. and the finding of the book was, the great majority of millionaires in our country are people that look like Warren Buffett, driving the same pickup, living in the same little house. People who don't live the lifestyle that we associate with great wealth from what we've seen on television. That's not the reality of the majority of millionaires' lives. What do most millionaires look like? They don't look like anything. They look like you and me, like anybody, like person next door.
Sure.
And so it's not, and also most of those millions were not created by extraordinary income. They were created by specific habits. So the pay yourself first. The second thing I loved about your story was, should we cut that this month? No. No. Why not? Because it's important. People are more familiar with this idea in the form of tithing. A lot of people are familiar with the concept of tithing. I'm going to give 10% to my place of worship, which I don't cut no matter, even when I'm poor, I give 10%. We get it when we're giving to God. Apply the same principle to yourself because you need to fund yourself. If you don't fund what's important to you, nobody else is going to fund it. So the first principle is pay yourself first. And the second principle is make it automatic. And that simply means, by and large, if you have to rely on willpower to write the extra check to yourself every month, to develop the discipline and the willpower to keep filing away that 10% every week, every 2 weeks, every month, it'll be just like the diet that people go on after January 1st. The gyms are 3/4 empty by the end of January. So you want to set up a mechanism where so much runs online now. You can pay bills online. You can have your check, automatically debited and shuttled to another account online. So David advocates setting up your whole Funding My Dreams program so it goes automatically. So you don't have to think about it. It just runs. So there's never a month where you're asking yourself, should we cut it this month? No, it's already set up. Easier for employees than for the self-employed, but you can do it as a self-employed as well. There are ways to do that. Go ahead.
Yeah. I interviewed in April Matt Monero, and he wrote a book called "You Need More Money," or "Why You Need More Money." And he actually talked about setting up he has a separate bank account that it's easy to get the money in, but they only have one branch. It's not like a Bank of America. They have one branch. It's a pain to drive to, and they're only open certain days.
Oh, nice.
So if he wants to take money out of that, in addition to the money he puts automatically, the other thing it reminds me of is, Ronald Reagan said, if we got rid of withholding, you would have tax reform right away because people would actually have to sit down and write a check. And now small business owners know how that feels. But when it becomes automatic on that end,
you'll feel it.
oh, I'm not paying taxes, right? It comes up off the top, but you're applying the same principle with your own finances.
Exactly. Yes. You're paying withholding to yourself. And in fact, and David talks about it, Henry talks about it in the book, there was a time when we didn't have automatic withholding, when people actually had to sit down and write those checks, and people would be late and they wouldn't do it and they wouldn't have the money and there'd be penalties, and it was a big mess. So yeah, it's like setting up your own withholding system for yourself to fund your dreams. And then comes the big question that gets to the title of the book, The Latte Factor, which is the question Zoe gets to eventually. Okay, this 10% of my income I'm supposed to be putting away to fund my dreams, like where's that supposed to come from? Because frankly, I'm already stretched to the limit. I don't have an extra 10%. You can't squeeze blood from a stone. I'm already strapped, right? I'm maxed out. And Henry uses, of course, the example, which David has used for decades now, of the latte. They're standing there, she's holding a latte, and he says, how much is that? It was like $4.50. Okay, suppose you took that one latte and you made it at home for pennies instead, and you put that $4 or whatever in an account every day. As it turns out, it adds up to, over the course of a year, that would pay for this beautiful photograph she wants to hang on her wall. And she's like, that latte would buy that piece of art. And yes, it is. It is exactly like that. Here's the thing, though, and that's the latte factor. The latte factor is, your latte factor is, what are you currently spending money on? And typically it's small expenditures, not huge ones, but it can be huge too. What are you now spending money on in little ways that are things that you like, that you enjoy, but given the choice, if you sat down, choosing between that and this thing that's important to you, that's meaningful, whether it's this travel or this experience with your kids or with your spouse or with your parents, or whether it's this new skill you want to have, this new experience you want to have in another part of the world, or this security. Maybe it's the security for your later years, whatever it is. What's more important to you, this meal out or that experience of traveling to this wonderful place with your kids? What matters more? We don't usually face the choice, but if you face that choice, you realize there are things like, and maybe, like you said, your Jeep, $600 a month. Well, you know what? I could drive an XYZ that's like $400 a month. Saves me $200 a month. Boom, that's $2,400 a year. Choices like that, that's the latte factor. And here's the thing for me that's so critical. It's not about budgeting. There's a point in the book where Zoe is like, oh God, here comes the budget talk. And Henry says, yes, it's time for her to have the budget talk. And she just like steels herself because she hates the word budget. I got to tell you, Curt, I loved writing this part because I hate the word budget.
Me too.
So Henry goes, okay, we're going to talk about budgets now. So first thing you need to know about budgets is they're crap, they're garbage, throw it in the trash. And she's like, what? He said, for most people, frankly, budgets don't work. They don't work because they're a pain in the neck. They're cumbersome. They're awkward. People don't stick to it. Budgets are like diets. They don't work. And here's my view on that. The underlying principle of a budget is the word don't. It's the word no. It's a budget is an expression of what you've decided is your limitation. Here's what I can't do. I can't spend more than this on that. I can't have this. I can't have that. The latte factor isn't about what you can't have. The latte factor isn't about what your limits are. The latte factor is about yes. It's a book about yes. It's a book about what do you want? What do you want to do? And then it's not about depriving yourself of a cup of Starbucks. Of all the Starbucks you want. No, it's about looking at everything you're spending money on right now and deciding, what would I like to redirect to fund my dreams? That's the fundamental yes that you're doing. And he has Zoe go through an exercise that he has people go through. He has it in the back of the book with a chart for it, where for one day you tot up everything you spend on everything. And then you can do it for a month. Everything you spend, every user fee, every late fee, every interest fee, everything. And you just take a look at it. You say, okay, that's my current reality. That's my reality picture. Is that what I want? Or where would I like to redirect to fund my dreams? And it's like the latte factor is like we all are filling our bathtub every month and wondering why it's not full at the end of the month is because there's leaks in it.
I love that.
And the leaks are all the little bits of money we spend every day.
It's very empowering because, and I work with people who feel that they're trapped, and they feel that they are a victim of circumstance, as Zoe does at the beginning of the book.
Yes.
I don't make enough money. My goodness, I can't even imagine living in New York. The cost of living, and it's easy to get into that mode, or you're in the bathtub and you're like, the water's not filling up and there's nothing I can do.
Right.
But the entire book,
got the faucet turned up the whole way. I can't turn it up anymore. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when you say yes instead of saying no, when you do these things, when you make these fundamental choices, which can be applied to financial, lifestyle, just about everything, diet, fitness. When you change the choices that you are making each and every day, it's so empowering. You're not a victim. It puts you back in control.
Yeah. Your wealth is just like your health. They work by the same principles. And the first principle is nobody else will do it for you. Nobody else will make you wealthy. That's one of the myths, by the way, one of the 3 myths in the book that Barbara teaches Zoe, which is somebody else will take care of it for me. No, they won't. Your husband will take care of it. No, your dad will take care of it. Your wife, your spouse, your accountant, your boss, the president, no. Nobody's going to take care of it for you. And the same is true for your health. What's also true about both of them is that when you're 20, 25, it's really easy to take them for granted. To think that it's like you have limitless choices. I know I felt that way when I was 25. Heck, I felt that way when I was 45. But no, you build your health and you build your wealth. Your wellness it has both expressions, and it's really all about those daily choices and habits. And it is about saying yes. It's not about saying no. Just saying yes wisely.
I'd like to ask you about you. You've co-authored books with authors who are diverse. You got Bob Berg, you have David Bach, you have Brandon Webb, former Navy SEAL.
Right. Navy SEAL sniper.
Yeah, it's amazing. How do you, in several books, you've done several books with Brandon.
Yeah.
How do you choose your co-authors? How do you come with these projects that are so diverse?
So first of all, speaking as an entrepreneur, there's 2 ways to look at it. One way is as a writer, as a creative person, I have turned down projects or not done projects that might have been viable, might have been interesting, but I didn't feel a click, a connection, a real camaraderie. I gotta feel like, okay, I've never been a Navy SEAL sniper. I've never been in the military. I've never been at war. But when I talk with Brandon, there are things that he and I both believe. It's like we have a real meeting of real camaraderie of sort of spirit, soul, and principle. We just naturally agree on lots of things. We're very different people, but that's true with Rita Davenport, who I wrote a book with. That could be male, female, old, young, conservative, liberal. I've written books. I wrote a book with Betsy Myers, who was Obama's COO for his first campaign, and who was in the Clinton White House. And I wrote a book with John Addison, who is very conservative, who was the CEO of Primerica. Doesn't matter to me. What matters is, who's the person, what are their principles, who are they as a human being? I got to click with that because I'm going to have to, like I said before, Meryl Streep and Margaret Thatcher, I got to take that person's life and put it on and experiencing it myself to some degree. As a business person, every book I read is a business because Curt, my family depends on this. Speaking of retirement, our future depends on this. So this has got to work for me. And writing is notoriously difficult to make a living at. I've written about 30 books now. Most of them, they've all been successes in terms of the creative fulfillment of them. From the business standpoint, most have been failures. And by failure, what I mean is not that they didn't find an audience, because they all have. Not that they didn't sell copies, because they all have. I mean that for a book to be a financial success, it needs to pay back the advance to the publisher and start earning me a royalty stream. Most books, the publisher pays you in advance. It could be $5,000, $10,000, $100,000, $1 million, depending on who you are. I don't get the $1 million advance so far. But they pay you in advance, and then that advance comes out of royalties. So if you get $20,000 advance, the first $20,000 in royalties you don't get because it goes to pay back your advance.
Interesting. Once
the royalties exceed that $20,000, now you're in positive cash flow. I've only written maybe a half dozen books that have gone into positive cash flow for me. The Go Giver books, some of the Brandon Webb books, some more recent books. I'm sure that the Latte Factor will go into positive cash flow, but not for a while. It's not there yet. So most of my books have not gone into positive cash flow, but I intended for all of them to do that. So you ask, how do I choose a project? One is I've got to fall in love with the person and the story and the life or the principles. The other is I have to assess and think, is this going to be commercially viable? Because there's a lot of really good books, even great books, they are not commercially viable. I've written books that it breaks my heart that no more than 5 or 10 or 20,000 people read them. I read a book I saw published 2 years ago, a little novel about a young man and a young boy who's in trouble who meets a mentor as in a wizened old chef, kind of Karate Kid meets Master Chef story. People who've read it love it. They say it's their favorite of all the books I've ever written, which I love, but it's only a couple of thousand people. I thought that a couple of 100,000 people would read that. Well, they didn't. It was a marketing failure. It hasn't worked so far. So there is a certain pragmatic concern there. Speaking as an entrepreneur, it's not really true that do what you love and the money will come. What's really true is do what you love that enough of the world wants or will discover and want, and then the money will follow. And not every book has done that. So I do choose projects that I think are going to be richly rewarding personally and that are going to be commercially viable.
Thanks for that. Thanks. That's a lot of great insight. And obviously the publishing world, like the music world, like the TV world, is going through a lot of disruption with the self-publishing, and people like a Tim Ferriss goes directly to Amazon, and then Barnes and Noble declares war on him, and it's just interesting times all around.
Yeah.
So I'd like to end on this question. You gave me we talked about freedom. And Zoe wanted freedom and how she found freedom. You talked about your definition of success.
Yeah.
When you talk about freedom, what does the word freedom mean to you?
Freedom to me really means, for me, it comes down to that sort of success definition is freedom is the capacity, the ability every day to be able to do what I was put here to do and do a good job, and not have that ability impinged on or interrupted or prevented by other obligations, by outside obligations of survival or of society or of whatever. I want to have that is for me is freedom. And there are a lot of environmental aspects to that, whether it's my own personal finances, where I live, my office, my space, my marriage. If my marriage is in discord, if our lives are miserable, people are screaming, then I can't do that. If my house is falling apart, I can't do that. There are other, larger factors. If the government is incredibly oppressive, then I can't do that. If my town is incredibly, polluted, then I can't do that. So there are a lot of factors that increasingly are within my control and then get out of my control. But the ones that I can control, or I can influence, then I want to pay very close attention to all those and do my best to set it up. So, because freedom to me is a daily thing. It's a daily experience.
Well, John David Mann, thank you so much. Co-author of The Latte Factor, currently number 5 on the New York Times Bestseller Business Books list. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It is my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
And by the way, when people, obviously the Latte Factor is available on Amazon, wherever books are sold. I've seen it, and I saw it in airports from here to Rome.
Oh, nice.
People want to learn more about you, John. Where should they go?
My website, which is simply my name, John David Mann with 2 N's, MANN.com. All my books are there. My blog is there. My bio is there. If you want to contact me, you hit the contact link. It makes an email that goes to me, and I read it. So.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, John.
All right. Thank you so much, Curt.
Take care.